padlocked steel gate. Locked on my inherited road, sat there in the early morning chain, tight metal cold, my truck idling behind me. Karen Whitmore posted a notice at the HOA clubhouse bulletin board and said the temporary restrictions stayed, then warned I'd be fined if I touched HOA property. I held the recorded access easement in my hand, a county record with book and page numbers you can't wish away. You don't lock an inheritance, finally someone fought back. The gate wasn't the problem, the record was. And their control only held until the easement showed up where policy can't override it. The morning starts, the way most of my mornings do, quiet enough to hear the old refrigerator hum through the kitchen wall and the soft tick of the cheap clock pinned above my bulletin board. I stand at my tool bench with a mug of coffee going lukewarm beside a scatter of screws and a half-fixed latch patting my pockets for my keys, like the metal might have vanished overnight. "Got 'em," I mutter, lifting the ring and letting it jingle once. A small sound. A normal sound. I step outside and the air feels clean pine and damp dirt, like the woods are still deciding whether to wake up. My truck starts on the first turn, and that alone feels like a blessing. The road my father left me isn't much to look at if you didn't grow up on it. 2 worn tire tracks cutting through a stand of trees, the kind of access road that never needed a name because everyone who mattered already knew where it went. That road has carried my family for decades, feeded lumber, Christmas trees, a neighbor's broken-down mower, once my father's casket truck the day we buried him. It's not just dirt. It's inheritance you can drive on. I crest the small rise where the brush opens, and I see it. A steel gate. New, clean, squared off like it belongs to someone else's life. I ease off the gas, blinking like my eyes are playing a trick. My tires crunch gravel. The engine idles. The gate doesn't move. "What the hell is that?" I say louder than I mean to, as if volume might make it vanish. There's a sign bolted to the gate, bright white plastic hanging slightly crooked like somebody rushed the job. The letters are crisp and black, Private Community Road. I roll closer until my bumper is a few feet from the metal. A thick chain wraps through the bars. A padlock shines like a new penny. I let out a short laugh that has no humor in it. No. No, you don't. I step out the gravel, shifting under my boots. The air is still. The woods don't react. Nothing about this feels like an accident. On the other side of the gate, 20 yards down, a man stands near a small utility cart, one of those contractor rigs with a tool rack. He's wearing a plain polo, no logo. I can see hands tucked in his pockets like he's waiting for a bus. He looks at me, then looks away, the way people do when they're told not to engage. "Hey," I call. "You put this up." He doesn't answer. He keeps his eyes on some invisible spot in the trees. "Sir," I try again, calmer. "This is my access road." The man's jaw tightens once. He still doesn't speak. My phone is already in my hand. I tap the number I have saved under HOA because, yes, there's an HOA now. Willow something. They sprouted up behind the tree line over the last few years, and with them came matching mailboxes, rules about paint colors, and the kind of people who talk about community standards like they're quoting scripture. A recorded voice chirps in my ear. "Thank you for calling Willow Grove Hills Homeowners Association. For compliance, press 1. Compliance," I repeat under my breath. "Of course." I press whatever gets me to a human. The line clicks, then the same soft music I've heard in dentist offices. My eyes stay on the lock like I'm waiting for it to apologize. Finally, someone answers. A woman's voice, bright and practiced. "Willow Grove Hills, H. O. This is Marcy. How may I direct your call? This is Ethan Cole, I say. I'm standing at a new gate blocking my inherited access road. I need to know who authorized it and why. A pause, half a heartbeat too long. Mr. Cole, one moment while I pull up your file. My file, I repeat. I don't have a file with you. Another pause. I can hear her typing. Yes, sir. I have you here. There's a temporary restriction in place. Temporary restriction, I echo, tasting the words like they're spoiled. On what authority? It's a community safety measure, she says, as if that ends the conversation. Ma'am, I say, keeping my voice level because I can feel my temper searching for a door. This isn't your community road. This is my access. I'm going to my land. Right now. I understand your frustration, she says softer, like she's learned the phrase from a training video. But access has been suspended pending review. Review by who, I ask. What statute? What document? What are you citing, sir? I don't have that information, she answers. It's policy. Policy isn't law, I say. You can't lock an inheritance. She doesn't respond to that. She just breathes, and the silence feels deliberate. I can submit a request for clarification, she finally offers. You'll receive notice. I'm looking at a lock, I tell her. Clarification doesn't open a gate. Is there anything else I can help you with today? She asks, voice tightening at the edges. I stare past the bars of the gate, at the dirt road beyond it. The truck idles behind me, patient. My hands tighten around the phone until my knuckles pale. Yeah, I say quietly. Tell whoever thinks they own this road I'm not going anywhere. I hang up and step closer to the chain. I don't touch it. I just look. The padlock is new enough to smell like factory oil. There's a tiny stamped number on its side, the kind you'd see on a storage unit. The man on the other side shifts his weight and finally speaks without turning his head. I'm just the contractor, he says, voice low. I was told not to talk. Who told you, I ask? He swallows. HOA. I take a breath slow. The woods stay quiet. The gate stays shut. Then I see it paper taped to the metal edges, fluttering in the breeze, official-looking, in the way cheap authority always is. A bold header, the HOA name, and a block of language that tries to sound warm while it twists the knife. Access suspended pending review. My truck continues to run behind me, steady and useless, like a heart that can't reach the limb it's meant to keep alive. By the time I drove back into town, my coffee had turned cold in the cup holder, and my patience had burned down to ash. I parked behind the hardware store, the one with the faded flag in the window, and the bulletin board out front, where people pinned yard sale flyers and lost dog photos. I sat there for a moment with the engine off, staring at my hands like I was waiting for them to stop shaking. Not fear, not exactly. More like the body's refusal to accept something stupid. A gate, a lock, on my road. I called the HOA again because some part of me still believed there was a misunderstanding hiding behind all that polite hold music. This time a different voice answered. Male, smooth, the kind of voice that wears a tie even when it's on speakerphone. Willow Grove Hills Association, he said. This is Brent. How can I help you? I need whoever authorized the gate. I said. I'm not asking twice. Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole. The access road off county line. The one you just locked. There was a pause, then a soft exhale like I'd said something mildly inconvenient. I can't speak to authorizations, Mr. Cole, but I can tell you the restriction is temporary. You keep saying temporary, I snapped. Temporary doesn't make it legal. Sir, he said, the word stretched out, the association is acting under community safety protocols. My land isn't your community, I said. That road predates your subdivision by decades. I hear you, Brent replied, calm as syrup. But the gate remains in place pending review. Pending review by who, I asked. Give me a name. I can transfer you to our president, he said. If she's available. Do it. The line clicked, then that same soft music piano notes floating like they had nowhere to be. I watched an elderly man shuffle past the bulletin board with a bag of dog food, completely unaware of the war that had just been declared on a dirt road outside town. Another click. This is Karen Whitmore, a woman's voice said. Crisp, confident, not the least bit apologetic. Who's calling Ethan Cole? I said. You locked my road. A tiny pause. Not surprise. Recognition. Like my name had been on her tongue already. Mr. Cole, she said, and I could almost hear the smile. We've implemented temporary access controls for the protection of our residents. Your residents can protect themselves on their own side of the fence, I said. That gate is blocking my inherited access road. I'm going to my property. Remove it. Karen's tone didn't shift. That was what bothered me most. If she'd raised her voice, if she'd gotten emotional, it would have felt human. Instead, she sounded like a memo. We control that gate, she said plainly. We control access. For a second, I just stared at the dashboard, like the words might crack if I looked at them hard enough. You control the gate, I repeated. Based on what? Based on community authority, she said. That's not an answer, I said, heat rising in my chest. Show me a recorded easement release. Show me a deed. Show me anything that gives you the right to lock me out. I'm not here to debate documents with you, Karen replied. I'm informing you of policy. There's a difference between policy and law, I said. You don't get to vote away someone else's access. Her voice cooled even more. If you attempt to tamper with HOA property, you will be fined. HOA property, I laughed once sharp. You installed it on my road. The gate is under HOA control, she said like she was reading it off a card. I suggest you follow procedure. And what procedure is that? I asked. Submit your concerns in writing, she said. We'll review and respond. I gripped the steering wheel hard enough to feel the texture bite my palms. You already responded, I said. With a lock. Good day, Mr. Cole. Karen replied, and the line went dead. For a long moment I just sat there listening to the faint hiss of silence. Then I called again, because anger makes you stubborn, and stubborn makes you thorough. The clerk who answered sounded young nervous. Willow Grove Hills, H. Oh, this is Marcy. Marcy, I interrupted, trying to keep my voice from cutting her in half. I want the legal basis for the gate. I want it in writing. Today, I can take a message, she stammered. I don't want a message, I said. I want a citation. We don't provide legal advice, she said, like she'd memorized it. Then provide the document, I said. The one that says you can block access to my land. Silence on her end. Then softer. Mr. Cole, please don't raise your voice. I stared at the bulletin board again. A flyer for a church BBQ next Saturday. A handwritten note about a missing cat. Ordinary life pinned to cork, while my own was getting fenced off. Fine, I said, exhaling. Tell Karen I'll be at the post office in 10 minutes. I'll send her something in writing, certified. I can't. Marcy started. I hung up before she could finish. The post office was 2 blocks away. The parking lot smelled like hot asphalt. Inside, the air was cold and stale, and the line moved like it had all day to do it. When it was my turn, I slid an envelope across the counter, my name, my address, and a blunt request for immediate removal of the gate and full disclosure of whatever review they claimed was happening. The clerk behind the counter stamped it and slid me the receipt. Received. The word hit harder than I expected, like a door latching. As I stepped back outside, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Then another. Subject lines that made my stomach tighten before I even opened them. Notice of violation, unauthorized access attempt. I stood on the sidewalk with the sunlight in my eyes, reading the first lines while cars passed behind me. They were fining me for trying to reach my own land. I read it twice just to make sure my anger wasn't making up words. It was real, formal, signed off with Karen's name like it belonged there. On the bottom in smaller print, a warning further interference would result in increased penalties and possible legal action. I lowered the phone slowly and looked down the street toward Willow Grove Hills, beyond the trees, beyond that new steel gate. Can an HOA control a road like this? I said aloud to nobody. Then my jaw set, and I turned back toward my truck because the answer wasn't going to come from their email. It was going to come from the paper my father left behind. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid of a gate. A gate is metal and hinges simple things. I was awake because of what the gate meant. It meant someone had looked at a line on a map and decided it belonged to them. It meant they were testing whether I'd fold. By sunrise, I was at my kitchen table with my father's old file box in front of me. The cardboard corners were worn soft from years of being shoved into closets and pulled out for taxes, repairs, memories. The lid stuck a little when I lifted it, like the past didn't want to be disturbed. Inside were things that still smelled faintly like hymn paper dust and the sharp tang of pencil lead. Deeds, old insurance policies, a faded photo of our first truck, a survey sketch with coffee stains. I slid documents into neat stacks like order could fix what Karen had broken. Then I found the folder with my father's handwriting on the tab. Access. My fingers slowed. I opened it carefully, like it might crumble. There it was, underlined twice in the margin, with a firm hand, perpetual access easement. The words weren't fancy, they weren't dramatic. But they landed heavy in my chest the way truth does when it finally shows up. I flipped through the pages, scanning dates and parcel numbers, watching a story form in black ink. The easement wasn't a rumor. It was recorded. It was part of the property's backbone, tied to the road like a tendon. I didn't want to argue it with myself. I wanted someone who spoke the language of county records to confirm what I was seeing. So I drove downtown. The county records office sat behind the courthouse in a building that always smelled like copier toner and floor polish. People moved through it with the slow, resigned posture of folks handling probate permits, divorces, paperwork that mattered. I stepped up to the desk and gave the clerk my parcel number. She typed it in nails, clicking eyes half-lidded. "You want the deed history?" she asked. "I want anything tied to an access road," I said. "Easements, recorded plats, all of it." She slid a form toward me. "Fill this out." I did, and while she disappeared into the back, I stared at a bulletin board on the wall, public notices, zoning, changes, hearing dates. The machinery of local power pinned in plain sight. A few minutes later, she came out with a thin stack of copies and a name on her lips. "Tom Alvarez is in today," she said. "He helps people with old records. Retired, but he volunteers." "Can I talk to him?" I asked. She pointed toward a side table where a man in a plaid shirt sat with reading glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when I approached, his expression sharp, in the way only someone who's spent a lifetime spotting errors can be. "You, Ethan Cole?" he asked before I even opened my mouth. I stopped short. "Yeah. How'd you—" He nodded toward the papers in my hand. "I saw your dad's name on those records for years. Raymond Cole. Good man. Always paid on time. Always kept his stuff straight." Something tightened in my throat. "You knew him?" "Not close," Tom said, but his voice softened. "Enough. Sit down." I sat laying the copies on the table between us like evidence in a quiet trial. Tom pulled them toward him, scanning fast fingertips, tracing dates and legal descriptions. He didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. "Tell me what's going on," he said. "An HOA put up a gate," I said. "Locked my access road. They're fining me for trying to use it." Tom's mouth twitched, half disbelief, half irritation. "They ever talk to you before doing that?" "They talk in circles," I said. "Community safety, policy, temporary restriction." Tom snorted. "That's what they say when they don't have paper." He flipped a page, then another. His eyes narrowed. "Here," he said, tapping the line I'd underlined at home. "Perpetual access easement, recorded, attached to the parcel." "See the book and page number?" I leaned in. The numbers sat there like coordinates to a buried anchor. Tom looked up at me. "This was filed properly. It wasn't a handshake deal. It's not a favor. It's a recorded right. So they can't just—" "Lock it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I needed to hear it from someone who lived in these documents. Tom slid the papers back toward me, steady and sure. "This easement is the road's spine," he said. "They can put up all the gates they want, but they can't snap the backbone without breaking the law." A slow breath left my chest, and with it some of the panic that had been coiled under my anger. Hope is a dangerous thing. It makes you believe the world is still logical. "What do I do?" I asked. Tom pointed to the recorded plat map in the stack. "You take this. You keep it clean. You make copies. You don't argue with them in the driveway. You argue with them where paper matters." "Court?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "Or a hearing. Or a clerk with a stamp. But you start with the record. Always." I thanked him and left the building with the copies tucked under my arm like a shield. Outside, the sun was brighter than it had any right to be. I drove straight to the diner on Main Street, the one my father used to stop at on Saturdays for eggs and black coffee. The waitress poured me a cup without asking. I sat in the corner booth and spread the papers out, rereading the easement line, until the words stopped feeling like a wish and started feeling like a weapon. My coffee cooled, untouched, a thin skin forming on top. I didn't care. I was staring at that book and page number like it was a doorway back into my own land. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the key pages, then emailed them to the HOA address listed on their violation notice. I kept the message short. Recorded easement attached. Gate must be removed. Respond in writing. A few minutes later, a reply came in fast enough to make me certain Karen had been waiting. "We don't recognize that easement." I read the sentence twice, then a third time, my jaw tightening with each pass. So it wasn't confusion. It was a choice. I went back before the sun was fully down. Not because I thought they'd suddenly grow a conscience, but because I wanted them to see the paper. I wanted them to look me in the eye while they pretended it didn't exist. I kept the easement copies in a manila folder on the passenger seat, like a passenger of their own. Every time I glanced over, the county seal stared back at me, quiet, official, unimpressed. The closer I got to the gate, the more the world changed. On my side, the road was still dirt and pine needles and fence posts that leaned a little from age. On theirs, the trees thinned into manicured edges and clean lines, the kind of planning that makes nature look like it signed a contract. When I crested the rise, the gate was still there. The same steel bars, the same bright sign, the same chain. But now there were people. A few neighbors, if you could call them that, stood along the edge of the road where the subdivision pavement began. They weren't blocking me. They were watching half-hidden behind polite distance. Their arms were folded, their faces tight with curiosity and the kind of caution that comes from living under rules. No one waved. No one spoke. I parked my truck off to the side and stepped out with the folder in my hand. The air was warm with late-day heat, and from deeper inside Willow Grove Hills, I could smell smoke someone grilling. The faint sweetness of barbecue sauce carried on the breeze mixed with fresh-cut grass and money. I walked up to the gate and held the folder against my chest like it could keep me calm. Evening I called not to the watchers but to the contractor I'd seen earlier. He was there again, leaning against his cart like he'd been assigned to stand guard over a padlock. He straightened when he saw me approach, eyes flicking to the folder. "Are you going to talk today?" I asked him. He shook his head once. "They told me not to." "Of course they did," I said. Behind me I heard a car door close. Then the crisp click of heels on gravel. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Some people bring their own weather when they arrive. "Mr. Cole Karen Whitmore," said voice smooth and bright, like she was greeting a donor at a fundraiser. I turned. She stood a few feet back from the gate, dressed too neatly for a roadside argument, white blouse, tailored slacks, hair pulled tight. Two men flanked her both with the HOA look polo shirts, clipped expressions, the quiet confidence of people who've never been told no. One of them held a clipboard. The other held a ring of keys. Karen's eyes settled on the folder in my hand. "I understand you've been making accusations." "I'm not accusing," I said. "I'm reading. There's a difference." I stepped closer, stopping where the gate forced the line. I pulled out the top page and held it up so she could see the county header. "This is a recorded easement," I said. "Perpetual access. It's attached to my parcel. It's been on record for years. You don't have the authority to block it." Karen glanced at the page, the way someone glances at a receipt brief, dismissive, already decided. "I've reviewed your email," she said, "and I'll be direct." "Please do," I said. She lifted her chin slightly. "We don't recognize it." The words hit like a slap, not because they surprised me, but because she said them like they were a power she could simply claim. "You don't recognize it," I repeated. "It's not a birthday card, Karen. It's recorded." One of the men with her shifted eyes narrowing like he didn't like his boss being addressed by name. Karen didn't blink. "Our association is responsible for maintaining safety and order within our community," she said. "That road now borders our properties. We have liability concerns." "Liability," I said, pointing at the paper. "This is the solution to liability. It spells out access. It's a legal right." Karen smiled, small-controlled. "Mr. Cole, you can stand here and wave paperwork all night. The gate stays." I heard a low murmur from the watchers behind me. Not agreement, not support. Just the sound of people trying to decide which side was safer to believe. I took a breath and kept my voice even. "If you refuse to open the gate, you're trespassing on my rights. You're interfering with my access to my own land." Karen turned her head slightly toward the man with the keys. "Change the lock." My chest tightened. "What?" She didn't look at me again. She just nodded once like she was ordering an appetizer. The man stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. He crouched by the chain and produced a bolt cutter from his tool bag. The metal jaws snapped open with a clean, practiced motion. "No," I said sharply. "Don't you—" He clipped the old lock off like it was nothing. The chain sagged. For half a second, my mind flashed to the thought that maybe they were about to open it. Then he slid on a new lock. It was heavier, thicker, the kind of lock you put on something you plan to keep. He clicked it shut. Clack! The sound echoed in my skull more than it did across the trees. "There," Karen said, satisfied. "Now there's no confusion about tampering." I stared at the new lock, the fresh metal catching the sunset like a smug grin. My hand twitched at my side, but I didn't reach for it. I wasn't going to give her what she wanted: a photo, a report, a reason to turn my anger into their paperwork. I looked up at her. "You can't lock a right," I said, calm enough to scare myself. "Not forever." Karen's smile didn't falter. "We'll see." She turned toward her boardmen. "Let's go." As they walked away, the smell of barbecue grew stronger, like someone was celebrating. Laughter drifted from inside the subdivision music, clinking bottles, the comfortable sounds of people who believed the gate made them untouchable. Behind me, one of the watchers shifted their weight. I waited for someone, anyone, to say something, to ask a question, to show a flicker of doubt. No one did. I climbed back into my truck with the easement still in my hand, my fingers creasing the paper without meaning to. My phone buzzed as I started the engine. An email notification from Willow Grove Hills HOA. Subject line: Emergency Board Meeting Members Only. I opened it, scanning the details. Date, time, location, clubhouse. Then I saw the last line clear as the new lock. Attendance restricted to HOA members. They were going to decide the fate of my road behind closed doors without me in the room. And for the first time, I understood the gate wasn't the point. Control was. The clubhouse looked different at night. During the day, it blended into the neighborhood, another clean building behind trimmed hedges and decorative stone. But after sunset, with the lights on and the doors shut, it felt like a checkpoint. A place where decisions were made quietly, then enforced loudly. I parked at the edge of the lot, far enough away that no one could say I was blocking anything. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and gasoline. Through the large front windows, I could see people moving around, board members carrying folders, neighbors greeting each other with tight smiles, chairs being rearranged into neat rows. An emergency meeting about my road. I walked toward the entrance, passing the glass-covered bulletin board mounted beside the door. New papers filled it almost edge to edge, layered like shingles. I leaned in, reading, "Emergency Board Meeting Members Only." Below it, another sheet: "Access Policy Update." I scanned the paragraph, my jaw tightening with every line. "For the safety of residents and the preservation of community boundaries. Access to the private community road shall remain restricted, pending review of easement claims." Restricted, pending. Claims. They'd taken my father's recorded right and reduced it to a maybe. I straightened and tried the door. Locked. Not chained, not dramatic, just a clean, modern lock that said you weren't supposed to be here. I knocked. Footsteps approached, then stopped. The door opened just a crack. A young man stood there, hair neatly combed, eyes already apologetic. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm here for the meeting," I said. "My access road is the reason you're all inside." He hesitated. "Are you a member of Willow Grove Hills HOA?" "No," I said. "That road doesn't make me one." His shoulders sagged like he'd been waiting for that answer. "Then I'm sorry. Attendance is restricted." I could hear voices behind him now, low and controlled. Someone laughed briefly, then hushed. I have a recorded easement, I said. You're discussing my property without me. I don't make the rules, he replied quietly. No, I said. You enforce them. The door opened a little wider, and through the gap I saw Karen. She stood near the front of the room, holding a folder, posture perfect. She noticed me instantly. Her eyes flicked to the man at the door. That's fine, she said, not raising her voice. We're starting. She didn't even look at me when she said it. The young man swallowed and began to close the door. Wait, I said, planting my foot gently against the frame. Not pushing, just refusing to disappear. Karen finally turned toward me. Mr. Cole, she said, calm and clear. This is a private meeting. You're voting on my access road, I replied. That makes it my business. She tilted her head slightly. We're discussing community safety and drawing lines, I said, on land that isn't yours. A murmur rippled through the room. I saw a few faces turn away. Others stared at the floor. Karen stepped closer, stopping just inside the doorway. You're welcome to submit your position in writing. I already did, I said. You ignored it. Her expression didn't change. We reviewed it. And I asked. She paused just long enough to make the answer land harder. The board will now vote. I felt the door press inward as the man tried to close it again. I stepped back, letting it shut. I wasn't going to be dragged into their rules, not like this. Through the glass, I watched them take their seats. Karen stood at the front, composed. The board members settled in papers, rustling pens, clicking. It looked official. It looked legitimate. That was the point. A few minutes later, the door opened, and someone stepped outside to make a call. I caught fragments as he spoke, his voice low but tense. If we lose the road, we lose the boundary. The words stopped me cold. There it was. Not safety, not liability. Boundary. Control. The man noticed me standing there and froze. He cleared his throat and went quiet, stepping away like he'd said too much. I stayed where I was until the meeting ended. Lights dimmed inside. Chairs scraped. Small groups filed out, voices hushed when they saw me. No one met my eyes. A woman clutched her purse tighter as she passed. Another man pretended to check his phone. Karen came out last. She didn't approach me. She didn't need to. She walked straight to her car keys, in hand, confidence unshaken. Behind her, someone taped another notice to the bulletin board. I walked over once the lot cleared. Security detail authorized. Gate monitoring schedule attached. They weren't just keeping the lock. They were guarding it. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, the metal cold through my jeans. The clubhouse lights clicked off one by one until only the parking lot lamps remained, casting long shadows across the pavement. For a moment, the isolation settled in. Not just being locked out of a road, but shut out of a room where people decided your future without you present. My phone buzzed. An email. Notice of continued violation. Final warning before legal action. The fine amount had doubled. The language was sharper, now less polite. It warned against further attempts to access the road or interfere with HOA property. I read it slowly, then closed the phone. They had votes, policies, guards. What they didn't have was the record. And sitting there in the quiet lot watching the clubhouse go dark, I understood something clearly for the first time. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of losing control. Rachel Dunn's office sat above a barber shop that still used a striped pole and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. It wasn't impressive. That's what I liked about it. Places that look expensive tend to sell confidence before they sell results. I knocked once and stepped in when she called out. Rachel stood behind her desk with her sleeves rolled up, glasses pushed into her hair, like she'd forgotten they were there. She didn't smile. She looked at my face, then at the folder in my hands and nodded. "You're Ethan Cole," she said. "Tom Alvarez called." That was enough to make me sit. I laid everything out, photos of the gate, the violation notices, the email where Karen said they didn't recognize the easement. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I just told it the way it happened. Rachel listened without interrupting, flipping pages, marking dates, circling phrases. When she reached the easement copy, she stopped. "They can't vote this away," she said, flat and certain. Karen's words echoed in my head. Community rules outweigh old paperwork, but they sounded smaller here, like a lie dragged into better light. "She says they control the gate," I told Rachel, "that it's about safety." Rachel set the page down. Safety is what people say when they want control without responsibility. I leaned forward. "What do I do?" "You stop reacting," she said, "and you put them on the record." She explained it simply. An injunction to halt enforcement. A certified refiling of the easement so no one could pretend it was a rumor. Not because the easement needed saving, but because the HOA needed to be forced into daylight. "They've been making decisions behind doors," she said. "We're going to make them answer in a room with a clerk and a clock." It felt risky. It felt necessary. An hour later, we were walking into the county clerk's office with a stack of papers that had weight to them. The building hummed quietly, copiers' footsteps, the low murmur of people waiting their turn. Behind the glass, a clerk with careful eyes slid a form toward us. Rachel filled it out, neat and precise. She passed the documents through the slot, including the fee, and waited. I watched the stamp on the counter. Red ink, heavy handle. It looked absurd that so much could hinge on a piece of rubber and steel. The clerk checked each page, pausing at the easement. Her finger traced the book and page number. She nodded once, then disappeared into the back. Waiting does strange things to time. A minute stretches. A breath feels loud. When she returned, she placed the papers flat and lifted the stamp. Thump! The sound wasn't dramatic, but it landed in my chest like a door closing behind us, no going back. Filed. The red letters bled into the paper, clean and undeniable. The clerk slid the copies toward us. "You'll receive notice of a hearing," she said. "Given the circumstances, it'll be expedited." Outside, the sun hit my face hard. I squinted, holding the stamped page like it might blow away. "They're not going to like this," I said. Rachel didn't slow down. "They don't have to like it. They have to answer it." My phone buzzed before we reached the car. An HOA email short-clipped. "We've been notified of your filing. The association will respond accordingly." I showed it to Rachel. She read it once and handed the phone back. "That's what losing control sounds like," she said. I looked at the filed stamp again. For days, everything had been about their rules, their meetings, their locks. This was different. This wasn't a threat or a policy. It was a fact. They'd wanted to keep my road inside their clubhouse. Now the county was calling it into the open. The county hearing room filled the way a small-town storm fills the sky, slow at first, then all at once. By the time Rachel and I walked in, every wooden bench was taken. People stood along the walls with arms folded, faces tight with curiosity. A few residents from Willow Grove Hills sat together in a neat cluster, dressed like they were attending church. Across the aisle, folks I recognized from town leaned in close, whispering, like they were watching something they didn't want to admit they enjoyed. It wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about who got to decide what belonged to whom. Karen Whitmore was already there at the front, seated beside two board members, and a man in a suit I hadn't seen before. Her posture was perfect: shoulders, back hands folded on a thin folder, chin raised like she expected the room to apologize for making her wait. When she saw me, her eyes flicked up for half a second, then dropped away. Not nervous, not ashamed. Just refusing to acknowledge my presence, like looking at me would give me standing. Rachel touched my elbow lightly. "Let them pretend," she murmured. We took our seats near the front. My folder felt heavy in my hands, even though it was paper. Rachel had the calm of someone who'd done this before. I had the tightness of someone who'd been locked out of his own land for too long. A clerk called the case number. The hearing officer entered, gray hair, glasses, expression tired in the way people get when they've seen too many grown adults fight over lines on the ground. He took his seat, glanced down at the file, and looked up. "Mr. Cole," he said. "Mrs. Dunn. Mrs. Whitmore." Karen's smile appeared like a switch. "Good morning." The hearing officer didn't return it. "We're here regarding an access dispute and a request for immediate relief. Ms. Dunn, you may proceed." Rachel stood. The room quieted the way a crowd quiets when they sense something is about to break. She didn't waste words. She held up the stamped document, red, filed mark, visible even from the benches, and her voice carried cleanly. "This is a recorded perpetual access easement attached to Mr. Cole's parcel," she said. "The HOA installed a gate and lock, then issued fines for attempted access. The association has no authority to block this road." Karen shifted slightly, but she kept her eyes on the table. Rachel stepped closer to the microphone. "We're asking the county to enforce what is already on record and order immediate removal of the lock." The hearing officer nodded. "Let's get the record clear." He turned to the clerk. "Read the easement into the record." The clerk stood, lifted the file, and began reading. Book and page number. Parcel descriptions. The language my father had underlined, words that suddenly sounded bigger when spoken aloud in a public room. "Perpetual access easement," the clerk read, voice steady. "Granting ingress and egress to the benefited parcel." I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes. Not tears, exactly. More like the body reacting to hearing truth spoken where lies had been living. When the clerk finished, the hearing officer asked, "Has this easement ever been released, amended, or terminated?" The clerk didn't hesitate. "No, sir. There is no recorded release. It remains active." Karen's lawyer stood. "If I may." The hearing officer held up a hand. "Ms. Whitmore, the association's position." Karen rose smoothly, still not looking at me. "Our community has legitimate safety concerns," she said. "This road borders private homes. There are children. We have liability exposure. We implemented temporary controls pending review. Review of what the hearing officer asked. A recorded easement is not a rumor." Karen's smile tightened. "We believe the easement's applicability is unclear." One of the board members beside her, a man with a neat mustache and a strained face, cleared his throat. He leaned toward Karen as if to whisper, but his voice came out louder than intended. "If we lose the road, we lose the boundary," he said. The room shifted. A few heads turned sharply. Someone behind me let out a small, surprised sound before catching themselves. Karen snapped her head toward him, eyes hard. "That's not what this is about." The man swallowed. "Karen, it is," he said, quieter but firm. "We've been saying it all week." Her lawyer started to speak again, but the hearing officer leaned forward, expression flattening. "I'm not here for speeches," he said. I'm here for authority." He looked down at the file, then back up at Karen. "Your association has no authority to block this road. Remove the lock." The words hit the room like a hammer on a table. For a second, nobody breathed. Then Karen's mouth opened, and for the first time I saw something slip control, maybe. "We intend to appeal. You may pursue whatever process you believe applies," as the hearing officer cut in. "But effective immediately, the lock comes off. Any further interference will be treated as non-compliance." He turned to the clerk. "Issue the order." The clerk nodded, already reaching for paper. I sat there stunned by how simple it sounded when someone with actual authority said it out loud. No policy, no temporary, no warm corporate language. Just remove the lock. Rachel leaned slightly toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Control dies under record," she said. Across the room, Karen finally looked at me. Not with contempt, not with confidence, with calculation. And that was when I knew the gate was about to open, but the fight wasn't over. Dawn came soft and pale, the kind of light that usually makes you think the world can't be as cruel as it felt the day before. I drove out before most people in Willow Grove Hills had their first cup of coffee. The sky was still washed in gray-blue. The road was quiet. My tires rolled over the same familiar gravel, and my hands gripped the wheel like they expected resistance. When I crested the rise, I saw the gate. It was open. Not halfway. Not chained back as a gesture. Wide open, swung all the way to the side like it had never been a barrier at all. And the lock was gone. For a moment, I just sat there with the engine idling, staring at the empty latch. The place where the chain had hung looked naked. The fresh scrape marks where the old lock had been clipped were still visible on the metal. I stepped out and walked closer, slow, as if the gate might try to change its mind. The air smelled like damp earth and pine, and somewhere deeper in the woods, a bird called once sharp and bright. The sign was gone too. No more private community road hanging crooked like a threat. Just two empty bolt holes and a faint outline where sun hadn't faded the paint. I ran my fingers over the bare metal and felt the coolness of it seep into my skin. It wasn't triumph exactly. It was relief so deep it almost didn't feel real. I got back in the truck and eased forward. The road stretched out ahead, the same rutted dirt and scattered leaves my father had driven 1,000 times. But now there was space again. Permission again. The kind you don't ask for because it's yours. I drove the whole length without stopping. No guard in a polo shirt. No clipboard. No someone standing near a utility cart pretending not to watch me. Just trees, fence posts, and the quiet hum of my own engine moving through a corridor of green. Halfway down, I passed the spot where the woods opened to the back edge of the subdivision. A couple of residents stood near their driveway watching. They didn't wave, but they also didn't look smug anymore. Their faces held something else, uncertainty maybe, or the dawning realization that the rules they paid for weren't as powerful as they'd thought. At the far end, where my land begins in earnest, I pulled over and shut off the engine. Silence rushed in. The kind of silence you only hear when you're not waiting for something to go wrong. Wind moved through the branches above a steady whisper that didn't care about policies or boards or locks. I sat there a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting my breathing slow. When I finally drove back toward town, the sun was higher. By then, Willow Grove Hills looked different. Not physically still clean lawns and matching mailboxes, but the air felt looser, like a belt had been unbuckled. The bulletin board outside the clubhouse had changed. I parked and walked up to it, heart thumping harder than it should have. The access policy update was gone. The security detail authorized sheet had been removed too, leaving behind only faint staple holes. In their place was a single bland notice with clipped wording. Gate control discontinued. Please direct questions to the board. No apologies. No explanation. Just the quiet retreat of people who hate admitting they were wrong. As I turned away, someone called my name. Mr. Cole. I looked and saw a woman from the neighborhood standing a few steps back, arms wrapped around herself, like she wasn't sure she belonged in this conversation. She didn't look like Karen. She looked tired. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, like she needed to get the words out before she lost nerve. I didn't know it was your road. They told us it was community property." I held her gaze. It was never theirs. She nodded, eyes lowering. "I see that now." Behind her, a man lingered near his truck, pretending to check something in the bed. He wouldn't meet my eyes, but he said almost under his breath, "That lock was over the top." It was the point I answered. He didn't argue. As I walked back to my truck, I caught a glimpse of Karen across the parking lot. She stood near the clubhouse steps, phone pressed to her ear, posture stiff. For once, she looked like she wasn't directing anything. She was reacting. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away, as if looking too long might feel like defeat. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just got in and left. Later that weekend, I hosted a small barbecue on my land, the way my father used to, nothing fancy. Just a grill, paper plates, and a cooler full of iced tea. A few neighbors from town came out, and even 2 people from Willow Grove Hills showed up, standing at the edge at first, like they needed permission to relax. We didn't talk about the hearing much. We didn't need to. The open gate did all the talking. When the sun dipped and the smoke from the grill thinned into the evening air, I went back to my tool bench in the garage. The old lock sat there in my palm, heavier than it should have been for something so small. I threaded a piece of wire through it and hung it on a nail above the bench, right where I'd see it every day. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. I stepped back, looking at it swinging slightly, catching the light. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, the same steady whisper as always. And for the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders drop. Finally, someone fought back. The morning after the posted county order went up, the gate stood open under fresh sunlight. The certified easement restored and sealed where everyone could see it. Neighbors lingered by the clubhouse bulletin board, reading the notice aloud, realizing control doesn't survive once it's read into the record. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. What broke this wasn't anger, but transparency, facts placed on file, authority exercised in public, and a community forced to correct itself. I drove the full length of my father's road, again breathing easier, knowing the boundary was finally clear. Finally, someone fought back.